It's a little bit of, I will probably do a better review and more thorough next week when I have more time to prepare it. But just a little bit in the past chapters from 41 all the way through 49, we were learning about different meditations that we are working on in order to develop feeling towards God, a feeling of fear, reverence, and respect, a feeling of love, desire to be connected with God. And we learned it from different aspects, different areas. All of it was bringing a relationship, a meditation to deepen our relationship with God that is based on love or based on fear. Love would be getting closer to God. Reverence is a feeling of awe of God and a feeling of wow, that I'm so fortunate to even have a relationship with God. The most recent meditation was a really beautiful one. We called it a reciprocal relationship. That if we meditate on the Tzimtzum, which is if we, let's start with thinking, if we ponder and think and reflect on what God did in order to have a relationship with us, he squeezed himself, so to speak, in order to be here, in order for to have a relationship with us. We should also be ready to squeeze ourselves and to hold to do put our own desires on the side in order to have a relationship with God. They say the story of a person who was trying to write an essay about relationships, about parent-child relationships, and specifically even the relationship with grandparents and grandchildren. So he decided, in order to really see the interactions between, in and education, he decided to go to a supermarket. He wanted to see how the relationship works between children or grandchildren and grandparents, um, when it could be stressful when you're in a supermarket and there's a lot going on and a lot of fetching, as we would say. So he sees a specific older person, a grandfather that comes in with a grandchild, and the grandchild is a riot. Like he is a firecracker. He's really pushing the buttons, and the grandfather seemed just let one person in. The grandfather seemed so patient with his rambunctious little rascal of a grandchild, and the whole time the person is quietly following them, and he hears the grandfather say, "It's okay, Lenny. We're almost out of the store. It's okay, Lenny. We're gonna get through this. It's okay, Lenny. Don't worry." And over in every aisle, he's following them, and the grandchild is putting together a tantrum. He wants this, he wants that. And the grandfather says, "It's okay, Lenny. No worries." And he was so impressed. I mean, he was ready to write a whole essay just on this grandfather and the patience that he has with dealing with his grandchild. So as they're leaving the store, again, the grandchild is putting together another tantrum when by the cashier register, and there's all these people watching, and still the grandfather is just so patiently saying, "Lenny, we're almost out." So when they get to the parking lot, the person says, "I have to say, I was following you in the store, and I heard you say over and over again, 'It's okay, Lenny, we're almost out.' So you are such a good grandfather to your grandchild, Lenny. Like he's so lucky. Lenny is so lucky to have you as a grandfather." To which the grandfather responds, "I'm Lenny." So the whole time, basically, he was referring to himself and the patience that he had. So he was talking to himself. So a lot of times in the previous chapter, well, we have to, it's almost the squeeze where we have to talk to ourselves and tell ourselves, it's okay. I may want this, I may want that, but you have to see the bigger picture also.
Well, even Rabbi, even David had to talk to himself. He talked to his soul, right? And he had to calm himself down.
Right, you're saying it throughout Psalms, right?
Yeah, from the Psalms, he said, Barchi nafshi, he had to kind of get himself under control, So there's a biblical context for this.
By the way, it's interesting. And we've learned this a few times in Tanya that and it's actually, let's start even just with Jewish law in halakha. When we pray, it's not enough to just read the words. According to Jewish law, when we pray, we have to actually mumble. We have to actually move our lips, and it has to be audible. And maybe I don't know if I discussed this in a previous chapter or not, but I remember even as a yeshiva boy, when I would go around in yeshiva, they would give us Friday. We would have what we called roots, and whether I was in Los Angeles, we would go to the downtown area or to Century City. And when I was learning in Brooklyn, we would go to Manhattan. And when I was in Miami, also I had a route on Lincoln Road Mall, which is a beautiful outdoor mall in Miami in South Beach. But in all these places, we had friends. We had Jewish friends that they would expect us on Friday. We would share them a little Torah thought. We would put on tefillin and we would say the Shema together. It's Friday is a busy day in the retail business, and these stores would give us a few minutes in order to end their week with a prayer. It was beautiful. But I just remember a few times when I would go to a place, or once one Jewish owner of a store would introduce me to a new owner of another store that just opened up, and we would put on tefillin, and I would give them the prayer book or the little paper that we would have the Shema written out on, and they would be reading it. And I said, you have to say it. They're like, I'm reading. And I was like, no, you have to actually move your lips. There has to be, let's do it together. The words have to come out. It has to be audible. And, so whether, Lynn, like you're saying, whether it's King David speaking to himself, there is the beauty. I mean, I wouldn't say do it just when you're in the streets. People may think you're a little meshuggah, but there is something beautiful to actually, vocalizing and having an audible sound, because that's really when it arouses you. There's actually an expression from our prayer where it says, Hakol me'orer hakavana. The sound, the voice, arouses the intention. Our thoughts, our feelings are going to be aroused through the intentions, through the voice that comes out. And we know that also from Jacob, our forefather, when he was going in disguised as Esav to get the blessings from their father, from Yitzchak. Yitzchak, when he was so confused, and obviously it was obviously on a spiritual level, he said, Hakol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. But the voice is Yaakov. What's the voice of Yaakov? It's the voice of prayer. That's what we learn out several times. All right.
And you can say that again, Hakol something kavana. What was the verb? Hakol.
Oh, me'orer, from the word
me'orer, wakes up. Okay, thank you.
The kavana stirs up, arouses the kavana. Very good, Lynn. Thank you. So now we're going to go into chapter 50, which is going to be a little bit esoteric. So if, the past few chapters were esoteric as it is, we're talking about different meditations, but it had a very practical parts to it. Our job now is we're going to learn one more meditation to wrap up this idea, but it's going to be a very high level feeling that we need to arouse. It's going to be the way that Tanya is going to address it in this chapter. It's going to be the contrast of gold versus silver. Now, although we all love silver and we would all appreciate it, gold is even better. So for most people, even if you would have the same quantity of silver that would match the gold. Let me explain that again. If a person would have, let's say gold is worth 12 times silver. So let's say a person would have 12 blocks of silver versus one block of gold. Most people would choose that one block of gold because there's something royal, something extra special about gold. And there's a lot of discussion, even just from a Torah perspective, on the beauty of gold over silver. But anyway, back to this chapter, he's going to explain that there's a meditation that arouses a love that is like gold over silver. So we're almost putting the previous meditations that develop love in the previous chapters as a feeling of silver, versus this chapter is going to be a feeling that will bring us to a higher level of love that is going to be like gold. So, what? Say again? Also fire. The intensity of fire. That's amazing. So in this chapter, and Jeremy is actually saying that it's like fire. Gold is going to be related to fire, whereas silver is going to be related to water. And we're going to actually explain that in this chapter. And we don't know why, but obviously everything is done with a reason. Even the color of gold naturally is like the color of fire. So there's going to be that connection, and the connection over here is fire is much more, it's strong. It's um, there's a lot of just explaining fire. I wasn't sure if I was going to explain it yet or wait until we're in the chapter, and I would have paused and explained it. But one of the characteristics, one of the differences between fire and water, there's I think 7 differences. If I don't know all of them right now, but there's many differences between fire and water. One of them is water connects things together, right? If you want to seal an envelope, you lick it, or you take a moist connection and it sticks together, because water connects things. Torah. Exactly. Torah is another expression for water. Fire disconnects things. If you want to make sure that there's no table left, if you burn it, it's going to be disintegrated into 10 million pieces. There's nothing left of it. It separates. So over here, the silver in Hebrew is called. Does anyone know how to say silver in Hebrew?
Zahav. No,
kesef. Awesome. Kesef is the Hebrew word for silver, and actually in general Hebrew, kesef is actually just then referred to as money, but literally it means silver. It just, the shekels were silver minted, so we refer to them all as kesef. Is when you go to Israel, and some of us in this class are going to be in it with us in Israel in 3 weeks, bring a lot of kesef, because so that's just not only bringing silver, it's bringing money, so you could have fun. Kesef also comes from the word of craving. In the Torah, when Jacob was traveling back to the Holy Land, he was leaving his father-in-law son. He and Lavan, Jacob wanted to go back to his parents after 20 years of being separated. He's like, it's time for me to go back. So Lavan says he was trying to convince him to stay. In fact, Rachel, who was Jacob's wife, stole Truffim, which were the idols of their father. Whatever, that's in a different Torah portion. We're not going to talk about it at length now. But the expression Lavan said to Jacob was, that you have the craving, the yearning to go back to your father's home. So in Hebrew, the word for kesef, which is silver, is also related to the idea of yearning, desire, and craving. And spiritually speaking, there are people that when they were on a level of ecstasy and spiritual, not only an awakening, but a spiritual adrenaline, they were in a place that they were in a full yearning to be connected with God, that they had to be brought back down to this world. Within that feeling of spiritual ecstasy, it was called also the sukh. They were totally in a desired feeling to God. That's going to be kesef. Kesef, which we're explaining as is that desire to connect. Like we say, like Kirby was saying, like would be more connected to water. Whereas zahav, which is the gold, is going to be more connected to fire, and it's a feeling of, it's a love, and it's going to be it's going to be a little confusing. It's a love that comes because of the disconnect, because of that gold feeling that you have. That's going to be why it's going to be called the golden love. We're going to have to learn it inside to understand it. It's a little bit harder to understand. I myself, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around understanding. I was going to look forward to some of the practical sidebars lessons in order to fully understand it, but we're going to learn it together. So just one more little point. Some of what we're going to be learning is going to be pretty deep, and that we may feel that is not really connected to me. It's a very high level of love, like this golden love that we're talking about, that may seem a little bit, advanced or beyond where I'm holding, and that's fine. But since Tanya is Tanya, that's meant for all of us. It wasn't written for tzaddikim, which are the righteous ones. It was written for me and for you. It was written for all of us. So there's going to have to be relevancy in this love that we can relate to. And that's going to be a lens that we're going to try to relate to in the chapter of how is this love relatable to me and you, because the Tanya as an entity is a book, is a map, a guidebook that is supposed to be relatable to me and you, and every chapter is speaking to us. So it's just interesting in this chapter because it's more of a high level. Even the Alter Rebbe, when he's going to describe the love, he's going to explain that this is hard to explain and write. So, just to give you a little bit of that background, for those of us that were in the class all the way at the beginning, when we learned the introduction, the Alter Rebbe says that I'm writing this as a private audience with each person reading this book. Every person studying this book, it's like a private audience. And we explained in the introduction that the reason why the Alter Rebbe found it necessary to put it in writing is for a few reasons. Number one, people were coming to the Alter Rebbe for guidance, and then they would leave, but they forgot what the Alter Rebbe told them. They forgot the guidance that they were given, so they would have to come back. And there was not enough slots in the Alter Rebbe's day that he was able to devote to speaking to the lines of people that were waiting outside after traveling months in order to meet the Alter Rebbe, and there was no time that they were able to even secure. So it became almost impossible. So then the Alter Rebbe took all the guidance that he gave over the past 20 years, and he decided he's going to write it down in a book. And therefore, you could actually take it home with you and not forget what you were told, because you can find the chapter that has the guidance that you need. And the Alter Rebbe says, consider this book of Tanya like private audience. It's like a yechidus. It's like that a moment of getting advice from the Rebbe. So therefore, every chapter is getting advice from the Rebbe, and every chapter is going to be relevant to me and you. So this is not going to be a chapter only designated for a tzaddik, for the high level righteous people. It's going to be it's a book for Beinanim. It's a book for me and you. So just to explain how we can try to relate to it, I shared the story probably a year ago, so it's probably worth to share. There's a story of a great chassid. His name was Reb Nissen Nemenov. Reb Nissen was one of the giants of Hasidim. If I'm not mistaken, he passed away in 1984. But he was a legend amongst Hasidim. He wasn't a Rebbe. He wasn't a tzaddik. He was a chassid. He was like one of us. But he was on such a high level that what they said about him is that he is at the level of being a Beinani of Tanya. To be the level of Beinani of Tanya, which is what we are striving toward, is the person that struggles, but yet always succeeds and always wins the struggle. He never fails. Even though he has the feelings in his heart that are maybe sour, but in his behavior, he's always succeeding, which means what he does, what he speaks, and even what he allows his mind to think about is always going to be in line with Torah. Even if he may slip in a feeling, which means there's a pop-up inside of him that is inappropriate, it never comes to the surface because he blocks it out. He changes his thoughts or he changes his speech before it could be inappropriate and wrong. That's a Beinani. So they said about him that he was such a high-level person, such a chassid of Tanya. So he was once visiting Montreal, which is actually where I grew up, but this was in the early, probably in the late 70s, when he was still traveling. After the war, the Rebbe sent him. He lived in a suburb of France, a suburb of Paris, that's called Brunois, and he began a tremendous yeshiva, Chabad yeshiva for yeshiva boys that are like 17, 18, 19, and now his son is in charge of the yeshiva, and it's a very, very prominent Chabad yeshiva that he began. He was the founder of the yeshiva. So he was once visiting Canada, and he stayed by a family that he was related to. So the family was obviously very honored that he was there, and they gave him the kids' room. He stayed in the kids' room, and the kid, the 9-year-old boy, had to sleep on a mattress on the floor in another room. So, but the boy was so he wanted to get to know his great uncle a little. So he said, rumor has it that they say that you're a Beinani of Tanya, and I want to know if it's true. So, no adult would ask that question because it's a pretty chutzpah type of question. But as a 9-year-old, who could stop him from asking questions? So he asked the He asked his great uncle, Reb Nissen Emenov, they say that you're a Beinani of Tanya. Is it true? And he says, why do you want to know? That was the response. Like, what difference does it make to you? Does it have any relevancy to you? Meaning, why are you asking? If you're asking just because you want to know if you want to boast in school about your great uncle, it's none of your business. But if you want to know because it's something important to you, so the boy was smart enough. He says, because I want to know if I could be a Beinani. So he says, okay, so let me teach you how to be a Beinani. And he told him, for the next 5 minutes, are you able to say Tehillim? Are you able to, do a prayer? He says, yeah. He says, okay, do it. So for 5 minutes, the boy is sitting at the table and he's saying words of prayer. And after 5 minutes, his great uncle Reb Nissen comes to him and he says, what were you doing? He says, I was praying. What were you saying? I was praying. What were you? So you were doing prayer. You were saying prayer. What were you thinking about? He says, I was thinking, why would my uncle want me to say prayers now? But I was thinking, words of prayer. So he says, okay, so you were a Beinani for the past 5 minutes. You didn't do anything bad. You didn't say anything bad. You didn't think anything bad. That's a Beinani. Now just keep that up for the rest of your life, which is obviously a high task. But if you take it in 5 minute increments for the next 5 minutes, can you do the right thing? The answer is yeah. What about 5 minutes after that? In 5 minutes, think about it. Can you do for the next 5 minutes? And another story I shared, I guess, a couple of years ago, so probably worth to reshare, is Reb Mendel Futterfass. He associated learning Tanya with saving his life. He was a colleague of Reb Nissen. He was a giant of a chassid. And if you ever see pictures of Reb Mendel Futterfass, you're inspired just from his face. He was a giant chassid of the Rebbe. He spent, if I'm not mistaken, 12 years in the gulags of Siberia for helping get Jews out of Russia, for forging passports and saving, after even sending his wife and children out together on some secret missions out of Russia. He stayed behind in order to try to get more Jews out. He was finally caught and arrested, and he spent 12 years in Russia, in Siberia. We're not going to go through all the details of the story. He was an incredible teacher. But he once shared that he was sent outside in the winter of Siberia as a punishment. In the middle of the night, he was sent by the guard to go outside. Now that meant death because they weren't given coats, they weren't given shoes. He didn't have boots on or anything, and he was in below 60 weather in Siberia. Most people never made it. So instead of even wasting a bullet on them, it was just let them die on their own in the cold. So most people never came back from that punishment. And he was outside and he was freezing. And at the beginning, you jump, you jog in place. You weren't allowed to move. You weren't allowed to run around. You had to stay where you were. So just in your place, you're jumping. You're trying to keep yourself warm. But at a certain point, it's just too cold. So the easy thing to do is actually to just rest, go to sleep because it's middle of the night, and you start feeling a little warmer, and eventually you just die in your sleep. But he knew that he couldn't let that happen. He wanted to live. He wanted to see his family. So he took the Tanya's message to heart, where he knows that to be a Beinani means you're working on the next minute. You're working on the next 5 minutes. So he said, for the next 5 minutes, could I keep myself alive? And he said, yeah. Meaning the idea of thinking for the whole night, how am I going to survive the night outside? It was impossible. He was like, I'll just give up now and go to sleep. But for the next 5 minutes, could I stay up? And he said, yeah. So he kept himself up, and that fought off death because the easiest way is to fall asleep and then you die in your sleep from the cold. But if you keep yourself awake, you won't die. So for the next 5 minutes, he was able to keep himself up. And that's all he focused on, the next 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes later, he's like, could I work on the next 5 minutes? That's what kept himself alive. So I guess I'm getting a little sidetracked and talking about the Beinani, even though that discussion of Beinani, stopped really by chapter 38. We got into a different direction, talking about the purpose of the world and then different meditations in order to awaken the feelings of the heart. But we're going to be coming back to that after this chapter. But in order to remind ourselves that even this chapter is supposed to be relevant to us and on some level adapted and make it speak to us.
So that's a lot of life anyway, isn't it? It's
So,
like baby
so
steps. Life.
Exactly.
Everything we do,
Yeah.
what we said, it's like
Exactly. And actually, you know, I'm a pretty avid sports fan. And it's like almost the most cliche thing in sports.
Yep.
For any player to say, you know, if they're asked by the media, do you think you're going to make it to the playoffs? Their answer is right now we're focusing on the next game. It's the next game, right? And you're right. In life, that's always going to be the thing. But at Bain, he lives his life though. That's exactly the point. Yeah. Yes, Lynn.
So I have one of my children going through kind of a emotional breakup, and just so hard to see because they thought it was going to end in marriage and it ended in breakup, which anyway, but to see the pain, I'll just say it in my daughter, it's woken her up. It's actually, she is more alive than I've seen her in years, and it's reconnecting her to her heart. So it's interesting that here with this Hassid, this guy that was so amazing, that he was able to keep himself alive in the snow. My daughter said the same thing. Mom, I'm just trying to get through the next 5 minutes. I'm just trying to get through the next minute. I can't think about how I'm getting through my day. And what is so amazing is the most beautiful thing is transpiring, and all the difficulties that she's going through are kind of falling away, and she's coming back to who she really is. And my husband and I are just like, wow, we're just so proud of her. But I mean, you know, as a parent, you want to short circuit the pain, but we're so grateful we didn't, because her soul's being awakened.
Wow. Ooh, powerful. And make sure you express to her how much you're appreciating it or how much you're impressed with her, because that obviously is gold for her. But that's, thank you for sharing that, Lynn. Wow. Okay, we're going to go inside. I'm just going to read a little title that I have here before we start chapters. I like to go through this map of the Tanya, and we went through a lot of it already. I'll just turn it around so you guys can see. We're going to be now on to chapter 50, which is all the way towards the end. But it's still color coded blue. So if you look, there's different color coded that, you know, explains different sections. Even though the Tanya doesn't tell us which section we're up to, it just goes by chapters. But if you look, all the 40s from 41 all the way through 50 is all going to be blue. So this is going to be the last chapter of blue, mainly because it's the last chapter about a meditation. So it's a high level of meditation, and over here they title it "A Love Like Gold, Yearning to Cleave to God." As gold is superior to silver, there is a love superior to all others, mentioned in chapters 43 to 49. So in the past, we've discussed many chapters of love that we develop in our relationship with God. The most recent was this reciprocal love, but we had different types of love. A burning desire to leave the body. So now, what's this higher level of love? It is a burning desire to leave the body, returning only for the sake of making an abode for God in this world. That's going to be the title of the chapter, or the theme of the chapter. It's a desire, a burning desire like fire, to leave this world and to be connecting with God. But what keeps us here is our desire to do what God wants in the world, which is to make a home for Him. And that's going to be a love that we're going to wrap up all the meditations with. It's going to be a pretty high level of love. Oh, sure, of course. And let's see it together. So it's going to be on 641. I'm going to pull up the Kindle now, and let's see it together. Here we go. Okay, just making sure everyone can see. You can see chapter 50 on the screen. Okay, so good. I'm going to see this here. Much better. Okay. Section 1, love from the left side. Section 1, when your soul is on fire. This chapter concludes an extensive discussion on meditative approaches to achieve love of God, spanning back to chapter 43. As we shall soon see, this final chapter touches upon a more intense form of love than we have yet encountered, which stems from a different spiritual energy. Now, all the types and levels of love mentioned above from chapters 43 onwards all have in common that they are from the right side, which is a quote from Zohar, of the tree of spiritual energies, the Sephiras. As we have learned, the core spiritual energies of the universe, or spheres, are divided into three lines or categories. The polar opposites of chesed, giving, and gevura, restraint, represent the right and left lines. Rachamim, which is compassion, is placed in the center since it mediates between the two positions. Love, which is an experience of closeness, is usually associated with the right side of giving and generosity. When such a feeling is mutual between two parties, their love draws them together. So, just in short, love in the sephiras, there's going to be 10 sephiras, which are spiritual energies with how God created the universe, God emotions of God, energies of God with which He created the universe. We mirror and have those same 10 energies. But so there's an energy of God that is more kind and loving, which is in Hebrew called chesed. And then there's an energy of God that is on the gevura, restraint and discipline side. There needs to be a balance, like we've mentioned many, many times, that whether it's a parental relationship or in a spousal relationship or in a teacher-student relationship, there is the balance of love, which is the right side, and restraint, which is the left side. So either it could be referred to as restraint or discipline. In Hebrew, it's going to be gevura. But what we've been discussing till now are loves, which come from the right side, right? That's natural. Love is kind. Even when we give tzedakah, the Rebbe always wanted that we give it with the right hand. Even when we just put charity in a pushka, in a charity box, it should come with the right hand because the right is symbolizing love. And we're giving it not with a level of restraint. We want to give it with a level of generosity. So we always give with the right. And actually, a Cohen, the Cohens were the representatives of the Jews in the temple. They were from the tribe of Levi, and they were the Kohanim. Cohens were people of love. They were Ish Chesed. They were the people of love. And I think we're going to see that on the next line. And the right side is associated with the figure of the Cohen, the priest, who, according to the Kabbalah, is a man with the energy of Chesed. So they were those people of love. In fact, in the Torah, there's a pretty, it's a law that's pretty confusing. It's called Mitzorah. Mitzorah is a person who would have a lesion grow on their skin. It's not leprosy the way we know it nowadays. It was more of a spiritual condition that would manifest itself on a physical body, or even on a person's clothing, or on their walls of their home. It would mainly come from slander, which was when a person would speak negatively about another person. There would be something. There was a spiritual flaw in that person, and it would come out through this mitzaras, as it's called, or the spiritual skin condition. The person who would diagnose the condition had to be the Kohen, which means even if there was a scholar who was expert, he wouldn't be able to be the one to diagnose the person. And when a person was diagnosed, they would have to actually quarantine for a week away from the people. The most famous Mitzorah was Miriam. Miriam was the older sister of Moshe. In the Torah, in the book of Numbers, she speaks with Lashon Hara about her younger brother, which, sisters, many people would claim have the right to do that to their little brothers. But when she did that, she spoke Lashon Hara about her younger brother. Saras, this skin condition, developed on her. And as a result, she had to be quarantined from the Jewish camp for a week, and everyone waited for her in the desert until she was able to return. But the only person that could diagnose her, or whichever person, is a Kohen. Even if the Kohen is illiterate, he's ignorant, he doesn't know anything of skin conditions, he would have to go with an expert, and the expert would have to tell him, yes, this is Taras, and then the Kohen would have to be the one to pronounce it. It had to come from the Kohen. Why? If the scholar is more educated, let him be the one to pronounce it. And the answer is because the Kohen is a man of love, is a person of love. And therefore, even when you're quarantining someone, when you're diagnosing someone with an illness, that means they have to be separated from everyone. It needs to come with a voice of love. And the Kohen is a person that had that voice. A Kohen came from Aaron, who was the original Kohen. And Aaron was known as Ohev Shalom Verodef Shalom. He was a man that loved peace and would pursue peace. And we all know many of the stories of how Aaron would bring peace within relationships and between friends, where he would go to each of the sides that got in a fight, and he would tell them, "You should know that the other person felt terrible for what they said, for what they did, and they wish they could take it back and make peace with you." And the person would be, "Oh, if he's ready to, if he's feeling bad, I'm ready to accept him." And then Aaron would go to the other person and say the same thing, that the other person feels so bad for what he said. And that way he would bring friendships back together, and he would bring relationships back together, because they were people of love. So the chesed, which is on the right side, is associated with the Cohen, which was this type of person. He was an energy of chesed. Um, you know what? Did I not turn the page? I'm looking in the book. So there we go. We're on the next page of the Kindle. The priests were responsible, the Cohens were responsible for drawing God's presence, the Shekhinah, to rest in the Holy Temple, an activity associated with the right side of bringing things closer together. This is because the priests, the Kohanim themselves, possess the soul energy of Chesed. And all these levels of love, which we have discussed in the previous chapters, that stem from the right side, are called by the Zohar silver of sacred gifts, or in Hebrew, Kesef HaKadashim. So this is a quote from the book of Kings. In Hebrew, it's called Melachim, where it talks about the money or the silver that was of sacred gifts, which means it went to the temple. So that who took care of those? It was the Kohen. So let's just see the next paragraph. It was the Kohen and the priests who received all the gifts of silver in the holy temple. All the silver of sacred gifts that is brought to the house of God. Let the priest take it. As the Tanya will now explain, this offers us a further hint between the role of the priests and the emotion of love. So far, all we know about the Kohanim is that they were people of Chesed, and we see in the temple that the gifts went through them. The gifts of silver went through them. So what does that mean? And if you remember earlier, I was explaining kesef also comes from another word of yearning or craving or longing. And that's what we're going to see in the next paragraph. And the word kesef, which is silver, is related to the phrase "you longed so much," or nichsof nichsafta, for your father's house, which is from Lavan in the book of Genesis, speaking to Jacob, suggesting a longing for closeness and love. So what we see now is the word in Hebrew for silver is associated with the word for longing, desire of love. And the Kohanim, which were in charge of the silver in the temple, were these people that had and displayed this love. In our chapter, however, we will discuss a different type of love, which is associated with the left side of Gevurah. So this is going to be confusing for us, because the idea of love, which is on the right side, makes so much sense. The right side is the idea of love. So a meditation about love coming from a place of kindness, from a place of love, makes sense. But over here in this chapter, on the next page, we're going to be discussing a feeling of love that actually comes from the other side. The other side is a side of Gevurah, which is a side of restraint, a side of discipline, and a side of strength. That's what Gevurah means. So the idea that a love emerges from that feeling, or from that side, from that attribute, seems to be off. And that's going to be the theme of this chapter. So let's see the next page. But there's another type of love which surpasses all of these levels discussed in chapters 43 through 49, all of which are compared to silver, Kesef. This higher love from the left side is compared to gold, and it's superior to all the other levels we have discussed, to the same extent that the captivating luster of gold surpasses silver. And this higher golden love is a love like flaming fire. And that's what Jeremy was saying before, right? Which is from the energy of the heavenly Gevuras on the left side. So let's see this little note that he gives, and let's hope that it explains it. If not, I'll add some commentary as well. This higher love from the left side is more powerful than the other types of love emanating from the right side. Right side love, which draws two individuals close together, is compared to water, which binds substances together. But love from the left side is destructive like fire, flaming fire. It's a force so strong that it can rip you apart. We see this also from the tendency of flames to flicker up, away from their wick, indicating that this type of love tears you away from your worldly existence. So I'm not a scientist, and I'm not an expert on gravity, but we know that everything falls down, everything goes down. Water or any liquid, especially, has that idea of flowing downward. The flow of water always goes down. They're always trickling low. It could come from gravity, but that's the idea of liquid in general. Fire is always gravitating upward. So unlike gravity that pulls everything downward, and liquids like water would go downward, fire is something that's going to rise upward. Like we all know that the first time you're holding a match when you're 10 years old or something, um, you have to realize that you have to hold the flame over your fingers, not under it, because the flame is going to go upward, and that means it's going to burn your hands, burn your fingers. So because the fire is always gravitating upward, and so the fire, even if it would, like if you look at the flicker of a fire of a flame, it's always trying to jump off the wick. It's always flickering, and spiritually, it's the idea of the flame trying to leave the wick, even though leaving the wick would mean death, would mean the extinguishing of the flame. There's not going to be a flame left if it's not going to be on the wick. The only thing allowing it to survive is being held down by the wick. Yet it still doesn't care. It still wants to leave the wick and try to go upwards. That's what fire does. So over here, the fire that's coming from the love is such a strong one that it almost makes you want to leave this world. It's a type of love that pulls you away from a worldly existence. I have to think about it a little more, but and so I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but it's just what I'm thinking about now. You could have a relationship that the love is so strong that they can match up, because there needs to be the love that comes from chesed. If a love is coming from gevura, which is going to be the love over here, that it's like flaming fire, could be destructive in the relationship. I can't elaborate on it because I'm not sure what that means, but let's hear.
Toxic relationships.
But is it coming from a place of love?
Well, one person might, and the other person
Ah.
may come from a sense of ownership.
Got it.
And the
And that's a
relationship
toxic,
is-
right?
It's a love so powerful,
Uh-huh.
it defies.
Right.
But also, I'm listening to the fire and then noticing the words. Words are very like intentional, and they say above, right? And so for us, above the heart, right? So love from the heart is what we've been talking about. Now we're talking about love here, and I'm trying to like make it make sense in real life for me, which would seem the love for God is so intense you want to be with God, which means death, but you have to make a conscious or grounded decision not to.
Yes, and that's actually. Could everyone on Zoom hear Jeremy?
No, I was going to ask you to summarize for us, please.
Okay, so and let me just. It might be. I think the microphone, but you can hear me well.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear a little bit of it. And what I wanted to say before I forgot was what he just said reminds me of Aaron's sons when they, right, when they had such fire. They had fire out externally and inside. They just burned too quick and disappeared.
Good. So both of what you said is exactly in line with this chapter. So then I'm doing something right over here, because I was a little nervous trying to explain, the beginning of the chapter, trying to get into it. But what you just said, Robin, and I'll just elaborate a little more on it, and then I want to repeat what Jeremy said, is that there was two. Aaron had four sons. Two of them, the older two, their names were Nadav and Avihu. And we're going to see probably in around 2 months in the Torah readings, where Nadav and Avihu, on the 1st of Nisan, which today were the 1st of Adar, so in exactly a month's time is the 1st of Nisan, it was the day that they were inaugurating the holy sanctuary, the temple, the way it existed in the desert, in the wilderness, and they were on such a fiery love that they just wanted to go into the Holy of Holies. So they went in, even though they weren't invited in, they weren't allowed to go in, and they died. But for them, they got what they wanted. Not that they didn't want death, but they wanted to just be totally consumed in godliness. That's all they wanted. And that's talking about the love in this chapter. And that's why it's hard for us to relate to, because we're not on that level. And we're going to obviously see in this chapter, we're not supposed to be on that level. We're supposed to have that fire, but then bring it down into this world. The return into this world with the ecstasy or the inspiration from that love is what we're trying to get. But again, bringing it back into this world. So to explain this in other words, all this, we went, I want to go back to chapter 36, 37, 38 a little bit, where we, at that point, we kind of veered off to talk about different meditations. Well, where we were holding then is the idea that the purpose of why we exist in this world is to make a home for God here. That's what we're here for. So the beauty is now with this meditation, this is the highest of all meditations. It's the meditation of gold. It's a meditation of fire. But the point of it is to bring that excitement of love, that deep desire, or that not desire, that flaming fire type of love into this world with a purpose. Exactly. That's the purpose of why we're here.
So I think it was a story. So
Let's see if I can put the figure me and
a
that will
son who like wanted to translate whatever, a son who wants to be with God so bad.
Can't really hear that.
It's someone who wants in a relationship, someone wants to be with the other so bad that it's so intense. They want to return to be with them, but they have to remain to do the thing that they were tasked with by that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that duality.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so we have a lot to learn in the German. That's very well said. So I'm excited that you guys are picking up on it and that I'm understanding it also. Okay. Let's see. So we're towards the bottom now. So we're talking about this high level of love, similar to the flame, that even though it knows leaving the wick will expire the flame, and still that's what it wants. It wants to just separate itself, which is the you would say consistency. No, it's the character of fire is to separate things, whereas we said water is to connect, to bring together. Over here, it's a love that's a flaming fire, which separates substances from each other. So first, we must clarify why love from the left side is higher than its counterpart from the right side. This seems inconsistent with the hierarchy of spheres, in which Gevura on the left follows after Chesed on the right. So if we're looking at the levels of spheres, love overrides, or love precedes discipline. If a teacher is only disciplining and not loving, it's not a good teacher. You have to love the kid, then you could discipline them. But if they don't see the underlying love that you're disciplining with, that's not helpful. For everything, there needs to be love over gevura, over restraint. And just in the hierarchy, that's the way God made the world. Chesed was there before gevura. And therefore, the feeling of closeness needs to be there before, or what we're talking over here, the feeling of the right side, which is chesed, kindness, needs to be before the feeling of gevura, which is lower than it on the left side. So what we're trying to understand now in the next few paragraphs is how could we say that the level of love that's coming from the left side of gevura is, which is we're saying is fire, is actually a higher level of love than the love that's coming from the right side, which is even higher than it. So how can we say that the left side love is higher than the right side? Yeah, yes, Tom.
Okay, so I don't know if what I'm going to say is going to make any sense whatsoever, but in the beginning we started talking about silver and gold, and
Yeah.
Jeremy brought up fire. So since fire divides, I keep having the thought of does gold in a sense divide? Because so we all like gold,
Yeah.
it's pretty and stuff, but does it? I mean, I just keep having the thought about how people fight over gold. I mean, in that sense, it can divide people.
And you would say gold more than silver?
Yeah. People, I mean, there's wars are fought over gold. I
Uh-huh.
mean, the countries are plundered, and I just kept having that thought. I mean, I don't know if that's an association with what we're talking about necessarily, but when we're talking about fire and gold, and I just think about,
Yeah, I like
you
that.
know,
I would
I don't know if
argue.
that makes sense or not. But
I think it does, but I would also argue, and actually, I want to agree with you. But first, by saying that if I would give my wife a silver ring versus if I give my wife a golden ring, I think
Okay.
it would bring a lot closer if it was a golden ring.
In that particular case, yes.
Yeah, so no, but actually I do agree with you that a lot of separation comes from gold, but it can also bring a lot of closeness.
But it's your ability to get that gold to give to your wife, the affinity.
Ah,
What would you do to get that gold? Right, the left side maybe.
in order to,
Right, in
good,
order to.
okay,
Think about the sin of the golden calf.
right, the golden calf is a great example. Okay, so all this is very good, and we're going to get into it more in the chapter. Just want to see if I could even finish section 1 today. No, I'm not going to finish it, but at least let's learn a little more. So right now we're trying to figure out how is the love that's coming from the left side a level that could be higher than the love that comes from the right side, which is chesed, which is higher in the hierarchy. So love from the left side is higher since it emanates not merely from gevura, which is lower than chesed, but it comes from the upper bina. So let me just say the next paragraph. It's true that gevura is lower than chesed, but the love from the left side of gevura is rooted in the higher energy of bina, which is the left in the upper triad of chachma, bina, and das. Okay, so let me just explain. I don't want to get too much into it, but um, we're gonna for now we're gonna say there's 9 sephiras. Really, there's 10, but let's just say there's 9 just for the sake of. You can either put them in a row one after the other, and then chesed is higher than gevura. Kindness is higher than restraint. But another way of putting them together is in 3 columns. There is going to be 3 on the right, 3 on the left, and 3 down the middle. Chesed, which is kindness, is on the right side, which is what we're learning now. Gevura, which is restraint, and compared to fire, is going to be on the left side. But higher than those, and then compassion, which we've discussed a little bit in chapter 46, or empathy, is actually going to be the blend of both of those, and that's going to be in the middle. But if you go higher, and many of you are familiar with this terminology of Chachma, Bina, and Das, which is actually the acronym of the word Chabad. Chachma, which loosely translated would mean wisdom, but in our Tanya here, we've been translating it as inquiry, the humility to think of something beyond you, the creative ability to catch an idea is called Chachma. That's going to be on the right side. Then you have the analysis, the breaking it apart and understanding it better. That's going to be on the left side. And then Das, which is the application and making it personal, that's going to be down the middle. So above empathy is going to be Das. Above Gevura, which we're over here, we're translating it as the flaming fire of love. When we're saying that's higher than the right side, how could it be higher than the right side if it's lower in the hierarchy? But it's because it's under Bina, and Bina is higher than Chesed. Bina is that ability of analysis or cognition to break up an idea and to really understand it. That's what's right above Gevura, and that Bina is higher than Chesed. So if it's okay if you didn't understand my map that I just made without putting it on the screen. But the point is going to be that Gevura, you're right, is lower than. Oh, thank you, Robin. You have that up there. Awesome. Let me see if I can make that bigger. Let me see if I could spotlight. Okay, we could see most of it. Very good. Thank you, Robin. So, could you guys see my mouse on Zoom? I don't think. Could you see my mouse? I guess not. But okay. So anyway, you have the left side, which I'm assuming is actually on this side. So that's going to be Bina, that's going to be Gvura, and that's going to be Hod, which is splendor. Very good. Yeah, Hod. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's just finish this idea. I think we're actually going to conclude with just the meditation that I wanted to get to. Here we go. The Tanya now explains briefly the meditative process which leads to the fiery love of the left side. So this is the meditation. And this higher love comes from comes through contemplating the greatness of the blessed infinite light, that in his presence everything is considered zero, literally, then your soul will ignite and become a flame from the glorious beauty of his greatness, and to gaze at the glory of the King with a love like flaming fire and intense flames that ascend upwards to detach themselves from the wick or the lumber on which they are grasped. Flickering flames look as if they are trying to ascend upwards and leave their wick. While this would result in the flame being extinguished, they don't seem to care. They have a self-annihilating desire for transcendence. Similarly, a fiery love is so powerful that it makes your soul want to run away to God and leave behind your bodily existence, your wick. Such an intense emotion comes from the realization that bodily existence makes real closeness to God impossible. You can only gaze at the glory of the King when detached from the body. And this emotion comes through an intensification of elemental fire in the godly soul. The comparison of fire here is not incidental. Your soul actually contains elemental fire. And when your fire is aroused through the above meditation, it produces this fiery left side of Gevura love. And through this fiery love, you come to thirst for God, not out of a feeling of distance from God imposed by sins of the animal soul, but simply because God feels distant even to your divine soul. As the verse states, my divine soul naturally thirsts for you. I'm just going to read a little more. And then you progress to a state of love sickness when you can't get God off your mind and your distance from him makes you feel sick. And then to a state of actual soul languish when your soul desires to depart from the body. As the verse states, my soul longs indeed, it languishes. It languishes. By the way, this is a quote from a beautiful, it's from Psalms chapter 63, but it's a beautiful, one of the best Chabad melodies is Sama L'Chanafshi. It's a verse that the Rebbe taught us that's based on this teaching, that my divine soul is thirsty for you. Okay, so let's just summarize this idea, and we're going to conclude here. We're going a little over time, but it's okay. I'm just going to conclude with this idea. This meditation, the meditation is, and I just want to put one thought in your mind. If you were to think of all of the thinkings, all of the thoughts that you have, you know how many thoughts you have a day?
Hmm.
Someone could Google it. It's like it's like 50,000. It's like an incredible amount of thoughts that you have in your day, because every second of your day you're thinking of something. Should I make a left turn here or should I go to the store first? Your mind is always thinking. Imagine the thought of your week. How many thoughts have you had in a week? Imagine the thoughts of your month. Imagine the thoughts of your year. We're talking about billions. Imagine all the thoughts of your life. I can't even tell you how many thoughts a person has in their life. So if I were to say, compare your thought right now that you're about to have this second to all the thoughts that you have in the rest of your life, it would seem like nothing. It would seem like so minuscule in the bigger idea of all the thoughts that you've had. If you think in the idea that God creating the world came from a thought, everything in the world, from the beautiful sunsets and the trees and the stars and the planets to the blades of grass and everything else that's in our world, all of it came from one thought of God. Think of God. Think of what God is. If this entire world is coming from not even it's coming from one thought. God thought and it came to be. That's what it says. God had a desire and a thought to create a world. So think of what God is beyond all of those thoughts. So your desire of your soul is to say, I don't want this world anymore. I don't want the relationship with God that has to be limited in this world. I want a relationship with God that is beyond or transcends this world, that transcends my own existence. Like a flame that wants to leave the wick, even though it means expiration, it's the fiery love that a person has to be connected with God, even if it means expiration. Because when you think that, and just the expression over here is from the Zohar, it's an important one. In his presence, everything is considered zero. Nothing is important. Nothing exists in the presence of God. So it's like, exactly. And therefore, exactly, it's a past thought. So that's the beauty over here, where that's where kind of want to run away from the existence of this world, and all you want to do is connect with God. And that's coming from a fiery feeling of, it's not even, it's not, I want to run away from my animal soul. Even my divine soul is thirsting for God and wants to quench that thirst that it has, that to the point of love sickness, which is a quote from, I think it's a few times in the Song of Songs. We say, it's a feeling of love that's so strong that I'm sick from it. And that's the feeling you have in your relationship with God. So, and just going back to what I said at the beginning, it's not a love that we can relate to easily. So we're going to have to figure out as we go through the chapter of what part of it is relatable in my relationship with God. And that's going to be, we're going to continue on next week. Don't want to go that much overtime, but okay, we got through the first section of chapter 50. Okay, everyone, have a great Chodesh. We should say have a great month. Today is the happiest month of the year, the month of Adar. It says, we increase in our joy. So definitely a joyous time of the year, and Purim coming up in exactly 2 weeks.
And in Israel.
Probably just hello and great class.
Actually, not exactly.
Please change the screen. Okay. Sorry.
What's it?
All right. Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank
Shavua
you.